Hello and welcome to Mind Gourmet. My name is Nina Kaiser. I'm the co-founder of Mind Gourmet and as always your host today. My today's guest is Joan Tabb, executive coach, public speaker, career columnist, the founder of Great in 8 Coaching and author of Building Blocks for the New Retirement, an easy, interactive 8-step guide for a retirement with meaning, purpose, and fun. Welcome, Joan. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you so much for having me, Nina. I've been looking forward to this for weeks, ever since it got scheduled. I love watching your shows.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to it very much too. And before we are diving into our conversation, let me introduce you to our audience a little more. Joan Tabb is founder of Great in 8 Coaching and author of Great in 8 Job Seeking Skills and Building Blocks for the New Retirement. An expert in managing life transitions, she is a sought-after career and executive coach, blogger, and speaker. Her new program, Revitlement, is reinvigorating boomers' retirement paradigm. Formerly, she served in leadership roles at startup and global technology companies in Silicon Valley, including Apple and Intel. So this all sounds so interesting. Would you please tell us a little more about your journey to who you are today and what led you to writing this book?
Sure, Nina. Thank you so much. It's kind of a big question because I've had, I guess, an adult life of many decades now, but I'll try to bring out the highlights for you, okay?
Yeah.
I grew up and came of age in the 1960s and 70s, and I don't know if you remember, but a major theme was the human potential movement. And it really intrigued me that we could do a lot more than we thought we could, that our brain capacity was bigger and our life capacity to do things was big. And that was the time also there was the Vietnam War, there were the killings of the Kennedys, Martin Luther King Jr. There was a lot of shakeup in our society. And there was a movement to say we can do better than this. And that always impacted me. I did a lot of thinking and a lot of reading by futurists and better societies and new ways to train and educate people. And I always was looking for big picture, better ways to do things. And I majored in psychology thinking I wanted to be a psychiatrist because I wanted to delve into the human brain and mind and help people. But then I worked with chronic schizophrenics for a couple of years and I realized that wasn't the path I wanted. Thank goodness, because I don't think that's where I would have found my happiness and my calling. But I did end up earning a master's degree in instructional technology, which is training, which combined my analytical skills. I was always a kind of a good academic, intellectual type, but my creative abilities too, to bring people further. So my career started in Silicon Valley because I also was a woman who wanted to make a living and be independent and on my own. And I found a lot of bright and brilliant minds in Silicon Valley. And I loved heading up the training. And then I got into the marketing arena. And then I built teams. And I always noticed that I loved empowering the people on my teams. That's the thing I loved most about management. And that's when I got into this place called the Career Action Center in Palo Alto. And I realized I was doing it as a volunteer. I was being paid nothing, but it was so meaningful to me when I would train people on career development and they'd write me letters about how I had changed their lives. So I think that the idea of coaching really started then because we had the major downturn in 2007, 2008 in Silicon Valley. And spontaneously, I looked at my husband and I said, honey, pull in your belt. I'm not going to earn any money for the next year at least because I want to help people get back to work. I know how to train people. I understand career development. And I did that. And I came up with a process of leveraging the well-employed people to help the unemployed people and did a lot of skill development. And I built up these employment networks through my son's school, through my center of faith, and then people started hearing this and replicating my model. But I stood back as a trainer and I realized there were 8 things that were separating the good job seekers who weren't getting the jobs from the great job seekers. And so my first book 10 years ago was called Great in 8 Job Seeking Skills. And it's as relevant today as it was back then. And it's the 8 strategies that people can implement that really catapults them to being a great job seeker. And like with all my books, it's short and sweet. And at the end of each chapter, there's a pencil and you apply that concept to your life. So when I would speak in libraries or speak at different conferences, I'd hold up my book, Great Mate Job Seeking Skills. And then, you know, the Bowles book, What Color is Your Parachute? It's a brilliant book, but it's about 1,200 pages now. So I'd say, okay, you're looking for a job. What do you want to read? 100 pages or 1,200? So I really believe, and you'll see that in my new book, it's short and sweet with pictures, side quotes. I make it fun, interesting, interactive right away, because that's what works, especially for adult learners.
Yeah, and you can put what you learned right into action.
Exactly, exactly. And that's what works best. So is that giving you some highlights of who I am?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
good, good, good. So
Thank
it's a little bit of an untraditional path that I've walked on, as yours has been. So we start traditionally, and then sort of the spark of who we are individually starts to come out. And when we effectuate it, it feels like we're really living fully.
You are so right. I can so relate to it. And I am somebody who is fascinated by the phenomenon of change, sometimes also frustrated.
Yes.
And so I find it very interesting to speak with you about one of the biggest transitions we make in life, from working to retirement. And I so like that you created a new word for this, revitlement, because, you know, in Germany, or in German, we do not have a direct translation for retirement, but when I look at the English word, it seems to be the word tired inside.
Absolutely.
Which sounds like old and tired, and which is, I mean, it's not at all the case, I would say. Yeah. So this new understanding of the time in life when we don't work anymore, what would you say is different today for retirees or revitalees than in the past generations? I mean, it's not about being tired, right?
Right, exactly. Although our bodies do age, and we have to make accommodations, and that's one of the building blocks in there. But in fact, we still have tremendous vitality, okay? But I also want to tell you, it was through interviewing 100 people for this book that I found out that most of them did not resonate with the word retirement, and they found it to be negative. And that's why, so I let my creative juices flow, and one morning I woke up and literally I wrote down the word revitlement. And I think I explained to you that I now have that trademarked. It's in the process of being completed. So what's changed, Nina, is that going back several decades, people worked and then they died. I mean, the lifespan in the 1940s was actually about in the mid-50s. So people would retire and have just a couple of years, and then they would die. And our Social Security program in the United States started in the 1940s, and they set the age at 65 because most people didn't make it that long, okay? They would die at 57. For those few who would live long enough, they got the payment. But what's going on now? Social Security, there's a lot of pressure on it because people are living on average into their 70s and their 80s. And they're not only living longer, they're living so much healthier. So you take a person, my husband just retired at the age of 64. Now, understandably, he was tired and he spent a few months really relaxing. And then he came alive and he's ready for vitality. And of course, having a wife with the 8-step program, he's gone through it. And he knows exactly what he's getting involved with. He's doing work with rescue animals. He's doing work with children. He's gotten into a fitness program. I mean, he is using his vitality. So I want to tell all those people out there that there's a new time of life. We didn't used to have teenagers and adolescents until the 1940s. Did you know that? In almost every society, we went from childhood to adulthood. So we created teenagehood, we created adolescence, psychologists started writing about it, specialists did it. Now we all acknowledge that our children grow up and then they become teenagers, and it's a special stage of life. So I contend that we have this new special stage of life, and it's defined as after the primary career is over, but before true old age happens. Now, true old age hopefully will happen to all of us, but it too can be a time that's not that. In other words, we need to take all of these times of life very seriously and see what the capacities are. But my focus for today is on revitlement. And that's this time of opportunity when the formal career life is over. That's usually somewhere in the late 50s or 60s, but before true old age, which for many people isn't until the 80s and 90s. and all of the opportunity we have. And that's why I put it into this 8-pronged program to help people break it down into a way of developing a plan that they can execute on to bring their vitality out into the world.
And I have observed something that I would like to share with you, and that is, I see people say, especially towards the end of their working life, oh, when I'm retired, then I'm doing this and this and this and this. And often these things seem to be very different from their life they are living at that time. And my impression is normally it just doesn't work, because you need to be prepared for your change.
Yes.
I mean, I'm speaking like someone who has not experienced it yet, so I want to be very careful, but it seems to me like it's not a magic switch from a stressful, burdened work life to paradise, because there is actually a real change involved also within us. So how do you see that?
There are a few things going on. First of all, when someone has worked, especially in a somewhat high stress job for decades, to turn off that process, even if they're well prepared and have gone through the processing, the internal, external process, say they've used the steps in my book, but still on a physiological level, there is a timeout and a change. And I've heard from people, you know, Joan, and I wish I had written about that. If I do the next edition of the book, I'm going to talk about that. You might have this whole plan done, but then expect on average 3 to 6 months to basically unhook from and get your whole physiology used to it. It's like, have you ever been on a ship for a while? Once you get off, you have had your sea legs, and now you need to get your earth legs, your grounded legs back. So I would contend that same transition does happen, that our whole bodies need to get used to it. You know, I married later in life. I was 42 years old, and I married a widower whose wife had died. And I immediately became mom to the child, adopted him. It was a beautiful thing. But guess what? I'm an average sized person. Within that first year, I lost 15 pounds. I was not on a diet. It was that on a physiological level, to go from being an independent woman always out in the world to being, I still did my consulting work, but now my primary thing for a number of years was this little boy who needed a mother and being there for him. So my whole system underwent changes, and my poor husband thought maybe he had a second life with cancer. I didn't have cancer. It was just that my whole system was reworking itself into this new role. Isn't that interesting? So I think we need to give ourselves time for any change and notice that. And I probably wasn't getting as much sleep, maybe paying as much attention to the diet, just tuning into the huge shift of the winds of my life. I had wanted this, but now that it was here, it was probably causing more stress than I expected. Needless to say, I've gained all the weight back. Don't worry about me. But I do want to say I personally have experienced that. When we go through a major life change, it affects us on a physiological level, and we need time to catch up.
And do you, in your work and in your coaching experience, also this weird phenomenon that often we desire change so much, but then when it's actually time and we start walking in our new shoes, something in us actually resists this change?
Absolutely.
How would you explain this?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because just this Saturday I gave a talk at a women's expo, and they asked me to speak on navigating through life's transitions. And I started out by saying, how many of you know the toy store Toys R Us? And everybody knows the toy store Toys R Us. I said, well, guess what? Changes are us. We have changes all the time, but as a society and a culture, we're not accustomed. We don't have a paradigm. We don't have pattern making of how to manage through change. And yet change happens all the time, right? So what I've done, I've also come up with a sort of paradigm for managing through change. And actually, I'm going to write my next book about that. But what it is that, first of all, it's hard to accept a new reality. Human beings are wired to go with what is. Just like I was wired, I was an independent, hardworking career woman. And at the age of 42, I get married and have this child all of a sudden. It was a huge shift. It was what I wanted, but it still took a while to catch up with it. So the first step in managing change is acknowledging the new reality. So I actually have people with a worksheet, and it says, circle the areas of change that are going on in your life. And it'll be you know, personal relationships, spouse, health, career, housing, financial, parents, children, environment. I mean, there are so many things that can shift in our world. So first, it's circle the changes. And then I always say, changes aren't usually solo. They're usually twins or triplets. When one thing changes, usually other things change.
Yeah.
So the first thing is we have to look right in the face of the fact that our reality has shifted. And that alone is a big step. It's not what it used to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like people who lost their jobs and they had big incomes and now they had small incomes. They were still spending the way they were when they had the big income. We're creatures of habit. So the first is recognizing our new reality. The second step, I would say, in making change is to circle the strengths, or what I call anchor points in your life. You've got to look at what you already have going that is working, that you can draw upon. Things like a supportive set of friends, even one good friend, a very good relative, maybe money in the bank, maybe credentials, maybe job skills, maybe you have very good, robust health. But so first, you've got to juxtapose what is the current state, where are the things that are changing, and what are your anchor points or your strengths that you can draw upon. Next, you've got to work from baby steps. You've got to start with actions, even if it's a small action, reaching out to a couple of friends to just vent and explain to them what's going on and have a supportive friend. But 3 steps. And then the next step that's really fun is apply positive reinforcement to your own self, which people don't always do. So you've got to find out what are the kinds of things that you can positively reinforce yourself with. A long talk on the phone, reading, a bath, a piece of chocolate, wine, getting a massage, whatever it is for you. But this is the broad steps. But change is very hard for human beings, very, very hard. So I'm trying as a paradigm maker, as a pattern maker, to make it into step by step that people can do to help themselves.
Yeah, and what you said, that if we want a change in one area of our life, it just doesn't work to just change this one area. And then suddenly life seems out of control because many things are changing. And especially when relationships change, it kind of like, ooh.
Yeah.
So,
what I noticed a lot of times when people would lose jobs or have a change of finance, that created a lot of stress with their partners. And many times there were separations and divorces. So changes of finances often impact that. And the same way with retirement, changes of finances. So there's one chapter that's called The New, doing things in a new way. And sometimes it's as simple as one couple that I met with that I interviewed for the book. They had always gone on somewhat expensive tours when they would travel around the world. And they decided, okay, we have less money, but we also have more time. So they decided to travel in a whole new way. They decided to they went to a local junior college and they took a class on how to take a trip to Italy and go to the small towns. They actually enrolled in a class, conversational Italian. And they stayed in little bed and breakfast, independently owned places that were a lot less expensive. And they found out not only did they enjoy it so much more and their experience of travel was so much more enriched, but it saved a lot of money. So I would like to share some tidbits in the different building blocks that could be a lot of fun for people to hear, Nina, if you're interested in that.
You basically started where I wanted to go.
Good.
I just saw, yay, chapter 7, it was the new, come, let's explore.
Yes, exactly. I'm so happy you read the book. Sometimes people interview me and they've just read the back of the book, but you've really read the book. So thank you so much.
Of course, I always do that. And so do you want to choose which chapters you want to talk about?
Yeah, 2 of my favorite building blocks.
Yeah,
the first is building block number 1. It's a Jungian idea. For those, Jung was a very famous psychologist, and he talked a lot about your essential self. The born-in temperament, the way you are, the things you're naturally attracted to, your natural ways. Like in my family, I'm from a family, everybody was an introvert, but me. I came out like, where's the party? And I knew everybody in the neighborhood. And it's like, people would say, where did she come from? I was so different than my mother, father, and sister. My sister just wanted to be in the room reading books all the time. My parents were quiet people. And I came out with this big personality. So it's like, you got the first building block is, let's go back to your essential self. because when you were a child, you really did express who you were, hopefully. I mean, some people are in very abusive or difficult childhoods, but in general, people did get to show who they were. I mean, you know, the girl who just loved to be on horses all the time, the boy who loved to be on horses. I mean, the child who always wanted to play with friends versus the child that was always reading. So go back to your essential self. First of all, it's fun. When I take people through workshops, they're always smiling when they revisit. I mean, one woman felt like in general, she'd been in therapy forever, but she all of a sudden realized that she had this great time with her sister when they were little singing. They would sing all the time together. And she realized that was something she wanted to bring forward that she hadn't thought about for a long time. So chapter 1 is a lot of sweetness. Now, it could also be bittersweet because maybe there were things you enjoyed as a child, but because of life circumstances, you couldn't continue to do it. There was the girl who loved animals, but then her parents moved to an apartment and she wasn't allowed to have animals. Now in retirement, she decided to do volunteer work at the Humane Society where she could love and be with animals all the time. So there's a real connection between what your loves were as a child and the kind of child you were, and bringing back those memories and seeing if there are things you want to integrate into your later years.
Yeah, and when I read it from my perspective of someone who is in the middle of her passion working life, I was thinking it's so important that we hear those inner voices and our passions and to follow what makes us fly whenever possible.
Yeah. I want to share with you, and I put little quotes in the book, as you know, some are funny and some are just interesting, but this one by the poet Robert Louis Stevenson I love. It says, "Find out where joy resides and give it a voice beyond singing, for to miss the joy is to miss all."
Yeah.
And I think, look at most children, they are experiencing some joy, and where is that coming from? And so to try to go back to that memory is very important.
I think so too. And if you don't mind, I think this leads so beautiful to chapter number 4, Your Life Force Never Retires.
I was just going to go there, Nina. You and I are on the same wavelength, definitely.
Yes.
Your life force never retires. A lot of people really enjoy that chapter because basically it contends that you have opportunity. George Bernard Shaw said, "Too bad youth is wasted on the young." Can you still hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Oh, okay. I'm not getting the feedback here. But this is a time of new opportunity. And in psychological circles, they used to think that psychological flexibility sort of ended with middle age. But they're finding out that isn't the case at all. In fact, this aspect called psychological flexibility is not age dependent. So you could have an 8-year-old who has a certain personality and they are stuck in it. And they're basically, that's how they're going to be. But in working with people now in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, they're finding out a lot of them have tremendous psychological flexibility because they also have the time, the wisdom, and the perspective to look back. So it's a very, I really want people to shift their understanding of this. And I'll bring up an example that I love to share. There was a man in his late 80s who was a very successful man. He ran and built 2 big companies. And his family always looked at him as, wow, grandpa. And grandpa provided college funding and grandpa was the big business star. Well, grandpa came to realize there was a price he paid. He had been a bully. He had had employees that became sick working for him because he was so demanding. And he was difficult as a father and a grandfather too. He was very critical. And he started waking up to it. And he decided to invest in these courses, a year-long course in deep psychology. And he came to realize that he, even though he was proud of some of his successes, he actually would have been more successful business-wise had he been kinder and more patient, and that he really wanted to end that legacy of pain in his family. And he wrote letters to his children and grandchildren explaining his findings. And he made apologies to people. And he went back and found some employees. And he ended up dying knowing that he had resolved some of this stuff.
How beautiful.
Yeah, it's very significant. So the chapter is called Your Life Force Never Retires. And by that, I mean the depths of your soul and your personality. There are opportunities to make change. And then I refer in the book to this chaplain who wrote a book about what's on the minds of people as they're dying. And almost to the person, it's relationships. It's unresolved relationships. It's, I wish I had had the time to talk to my mother. I wish I had gone back to my first husband and apologized. I wish I had made peace with my adult son. So relationships and the opportunity to do repair work is always there. As long as we have life, we have the opportunity to do that repair work and the revisiting of psychological issues that were going on in our life. And the energy that frees up can be tremendous.
Mm-hmm. And you so, in my opinion, rightly say in chapter number 5, we are wired for connection.
Oh, that is an incredible one. Now, did you know that in England, they now have a ministry of loneliness?
No.
There's a ministry of loneliness that they put money and resources into because people are dying of loneliness. Conversely, connection gives people vital life force. So when you have older people isolated, their whole systems go down. People are wired, as you're saying, for connection. So that chapter is called You Gotta Have Friends. And I also talk about the need for social flexibility muscle. I give examples. Life changes, right? We've discussed that. So an example of a woman who she couldn't wait to retire. She was going to travel with her husband. She had her good friends. Well, her husband died a few months after she retired, and both of her friends got very sick. So here she was. Her plans for retirement did involve people, but all 3 of those people were not able to participate with her. So she saw herself sinking into depression. Her children were worried, and she took it upon herself. She went online and she said she was looking in her neighborhood group for people to walk with. So she first started by getting out and getting acquaintances. And through those women, she met other people and she got back into community and she had to start over again. It wasn't easy, but we need vital social connections. That's one of the values of participating and doing volunteer work, doing it with others. And studies are now showing that the same pleasure centers that are stimulated when you have sex and when you eat good food are also stimulated when you're participating and doing things for and with others.
Very.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. Yeah.
We are wired for social connection, but we have to exercise that social flexibility muscle because we don't always have the same people around. And we need to learn to make new friends. So that ministry of loneliness in England, what they do is they find older people who live in a given geographic area, and they're doing these nightclubs like at 5 o'clock at night and bringing in food, music, dancing. These people are coming alive. They're making friends. They're saying it's the best time they ever had. So many times people think, oh, that's what older people want. They just sit in their apartment. No, no. If given the choice, they want to be involved. They want people. They want interaction. So I think it's really important, even if you're an introvert, you're still a person who needs other people. Maybe not to the extent that a very extroverted person would, who really, needs that to get energy, but even introverted people need social interaction.
I am the best example for that. I'm a very introverted person, but I would never be able to live a happy life without my social connections. It's very, very important for me. And
I was just going to say, and also when people retire, they don't recognize that they had, even if they don't like some of their coworkers, they were used to dealing with people every day, 5 days a week. Then all of a sudden that's done. That's over. So the regular social interactions in the parking lot, getting coffee, none of that happens. You have to make it intentional now because it was built naturally into your life.
Yeah. By the way, that's exactly what happened to me when I morphed from being an elementary teacher to a solopreneur or a husband and wife-preneur. And it's a very different thing if you have really to make appointments to see somebody, and especially in person,
yes.
than if you meet them anyway. And I wanted to go right to chapter 6, which is service, community, and legacy, because
yes.
I have been reading so much lately about how healthy it is to give, and that there's research being done about the health and benefits in general that come from giving, not necessarily receiving. And this is so beautiful. And I think this also helps us to take our attention off of ourselves sometimes. And so
Yes.
Can you dive a little bit into this chapter, please?
Yeah. And well, first of all, just even anecdotally, when I interviewed people for this book, the time that most of them lit up most was when they talked about their volunteer work. I just happened to notice that. I was in one community, it was in Park City, Utah, and a lot of people were skiers. And when they retired, they were now working with the wounded veterans, or they were working with children who had disabilities. But the way their face lit up, it was palpable that this was such a meaningful part of their lives. And then on a personal level, every year I adopt a third grade class, and I love it. I teach art and literacy, and I set up a whole program. Each child ends up owning 5 art biographies by the end of the year, but they have to earn them by reading them to 3 people. And then we do an art project of that type of artist. But it's so cute. This year I have a class of real overachievers. One boy read it to 33 people. 33 people, can you imagine? But my husband even notices on the Fridays that I go into the classroom, I'm there half a day, he said, you wake up so happy. I just love, and these children's faces, and I come in, Ms. Joan, and they all hug me, and they're so excited to see me, and what art is today, and what are we doing today? The joy that it gives you is unbelievable. And have you done volunteer work that you've enjoyed?
No, I think I have never volunteered. I mean, I have taught school for 20 years.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I think that's part of the giving back too. You know what I mean? You were giving a lot of yourself. But the point is, when people have a lot more free time, especially for people who aren't used to being of service that way, it can be a tremendous addition to their lives, as well as we were saying in the beginning, to sort of healing the planet as well. We really need the energies, wisdom, skills that older people can bring in. I mean, it's just so funny when I'm in that classroom and the children ask me something, and one of them was in a little bit of a smart alecky way, said, how old are you, Ms. Joan? And I said, I'm 63 years old. They said, wow, and you're still doing all of this. So I realized it was kind of good for the children to see a model of somebody, like, to them that sounds so old, but she's still active. She's, coming in these colorful costumes and teaching them things and having fun. It's important for people to see the energy and the wisdom and the experience that older people can bring to different populations. I think that's so important, and the joy that you get, but also you're giving. And remember what I just said, the research that shows the pleasure centers of your brain light up when you're giving. So you get a personal reward in that way. Plus, they're showing it keeps you living longer too, because they say we have a gene for altruism. Isn't that interesting? A gene for altruism. And they're noticing, even when they do research on little babies, that they seem to want to share. First, they want enough for themselves, but then they get old enough and they do want to share. So they like to see the other children happy, which is nice to know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And there are so many ways to give back, but a lot of people I met with also question how to get started, or clients of mine, how to get started. So I do have in the back of the book a list of very good and varied kind of places you can volunteer. So I always suggest start with what you're interested in. Some people are interested in the environment, some people in health, some people in hunger, some people in using their career skills. That's another chapter, extracting from your career life. But you've got to first decide what's important to you. So for me, I love being around children. I mean, that was a sadness for me that I didn't have children. I decided I wanted to find a widower with a small child, and that's what I found, and that's who I married 21 years ago. So you've got to decide what's important to you and what makes you happy, and then you get into that kind of volunteer work. And there are many ways of being of service too. One woman was a retired nurse, and she found out about joining with the Red Cross, and she goes on international trips using her skills. So there's very exciting ways to get involved too, but a lot of people just don't know how to get started.
Yeah, so that brings us to number 8, building an action plan.
Yes. And that is so important, because remember earlier in the conversation, we said people really don't like change, and they also don't really like to get started on something. So I've learned over time from being a trainer and a coach is that it's really important to build a plan and put due dates in too. So it's called building blocks because it's a fun model. So at the end, I have you gather all of the things that you've written that you're interested in, and you put it in the building blocks. And then on the next page, I have you put it into an action plan that actually has you not just have the start date of when you're going to do things and check it off, but interim steps. Because for instance, maybe your intention is to do volunteer work in the area of hunger. So maybe interim steps are going to be to research online to find hunger related organizations in your area, and the next step and the start date of when you're actually going to go down there to do the work. So I think it's so important for adult training. We know that people have to not just have intention, but build a plan and have dates and check it off and get accountability. Accountability is so important, but I still like to make it easy and fun. And that's why I've actually had the building blocks built. I have them on the shelf here. So when I give talks, I show people, okay, what building block are we on now? So to break it down into manageable chunks of areas and topics to look at.
Which is very important because that makes us empowered and not overwhelmed.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. Yes.
And there's one more important chapter that says you are one body. Care for it, appreciate it, having gratitude for having so much of your youth inside instead of trying to reshape the outside.
I love the way you put that. That's exactly true. But people respond to that differently, and I give them space and options. So I break it down into 3 areas. Number 1, in terms of your the health chapter, your medical conditions. Any conditions that you have, you've got to be up to date, see the doctors, follow the instructions, and do that. Number 2, your physical body. There is more to maintain and take care of as we get older. You know, up until your 30s, 40s, you don't even have to pay that much attention. Then you do have to pay more attention. So I ask people to consciously look at their fitness, their nutrition, their stress, their exercise. Those things do need to be taken into consideration. And then there's that unusual area called your changing appearance. And that's the one that I say, give people a lot of options and leeways because it's very personal. One woman I interviewed said, you know what? My son is getting married. My skin prematurely wrinkled. I want to get a facelift. My husband doesn't like the idea. My children don't, but I've put the money aside and I want to look good at his wedding. After that, I'm not going to do anything. So she did it. She invested thousands of dollars. She went through the pain, everything, but she was happy with the way she looked. Other people, I interviewed people who said, you know what? I know my face looks older. I don't care. I just don't want people to take pictures because in my mind, I still look like I was 30. And that's how they deal with it. It's so interesting, but I think it does require us to look at that as a topic because we all live in this society that loves youth. And when your youthful appearance fades away, what are you going to do about it? We can judge and say, well, the healthiest reaction is just look the best you can and get on with it. But for some people, they want to do things, and that's okay. What I'm suggesting is being very conscious of the decision you're making and weigh what is it going to cost, what is the time, what is the health risk, what else could I be investing in? So just you decide for you what's important. And then one fellow I loved, he said, are you kidding? I've been married to my wife for 50 years and I look at every line on her face as lifelines. And I follow all of those lifelines and they lead me to my memories. Do you remember that quote? It's a beautiful, beautiful quote. I'd like to read that. A man named Jaime Yankelovich told me that. And I asked him if I could quote him in the book. And he said yes. And I thought that was so beautiful. Here it is. Okay. Here, this is what he wrote. He wrote, wrinkles are the roads of life. Some are paved, others are dusted, as in nature. And when you live close to someone, you can name all the streets that bring you to your memories and soul. Oh, I get chills whenever I read that.
This is very poetic. Beautiful.
Yeah, very, very. But for him, that's how he looks at his wife, with love, and he sees the wrinkles, but he sees the life they represent. Another woman who was a rainmaker in her law firm, they asked her, you know, she was bringing the business in. That's a rainmaker, and she got all this Juvederm, Botox because she was competing against people who looked more youthful than she did. But the minute she retired, she said, "That's it, no more of that stuff." She knew that her face and her appearance mattered a lot in her profession, but in her personal life and the things she wanted to do, she really didn't give a damn what she looked like. She was living more from the inside out. Some people live more from the inside out. Some people live more from the outside in. And you've got to decide. My mother said she decided inside herself. My mother was 17 years old. That's what she decided, even though she lived till she was 87. But she didn't want pictures taken. And she said, I'm walking around and this is what I look like to me. So it was a positive delusion for her.
That's true.
Yes.
So if we think about the building blocks for the new retirement, did we oversee something? Is there anything else that we need to?
I think the one thing is, and I said in my next edition, I'm going to write this, the transition period. Give yourself a few months. I'd say on an average, it's between about 3 and 6 months for R&R. Also, when you go into work every day, your mind now has to focus in that professional area that you're being paid for, right? Whatever it is that you do, your energies and your mind have to go to the job. All of a sudden, that's turned off. Nina, it's like off. So you have to get back in touch with your own thoughts, your own pace. Remember, you had to get up usually every time at the same time, and you had to work to the needs and requirements of the work environment. Well, now you own your time. You own your patterns. Maybe you had to get up early, but maybe your natural pattern is to get up at 9 or 10 in the morning. And you can now. So I think you need the time to get into reacquainting yourself with your natural rhythms. And I think that's something we need to add on, that it's a special time to be reacquainted with your natural rhythms and your natural gifts and your natural wisdom. And there are also these groups called elder circles, and I write about that in the Western world, we're having a reawakening of the value of older people and the gifts they can bring. So I do want to encourage people to look into that, elder circles. And it's a phenomenon that's going on actually worldwide. And it's a way for older people to get together, recognize their gifts, and then focus on ways they can give back.
Yeah, this is beautiful. And even though I'm not an elder, if it's okay for you, I would like to tell you what I'm taking away from reading your book.
Oh, well, then I just want to tell you, Nina, my first Revitlement workshop, half the people who participated were in their 40s. And I said, what brings you to this? And they said, I'm ready for revitlement. And it turned out each and every one had gone through a life change. 2 of them were in the process of a divorce. One of them had had a major health change, and one of them had a big career change. So they felt like they were ready for revitlement.
And this is exactly the point, because we all go through major shifts. And I was thinking, yes, I want to reconnect to what makes me fly and what I always love to do. It's important to care for our whole self, including our bodies, because they carry us through life.
Yes.
It's good to know our skills and to ask ourselves what else we might want to do for them, actually, at any point in time, to focus on what makes me grow and to value and to deepen my most important social connections, not to forget to emphasize on giving, and to always, always stay curious for the possibility life offers to me.
I think the difference is that the people who are actually in a retirement period have more time. They're not occupied with still making a living and doing their life's work. So they have many more choices. Yeah. But in some ways, a younger person like you, the free time you do have is even more precious because there's less of it. And as you were saying, you don't want to have some bucket list in the future. You want to integrate the fun stuff now. I wrote an article called Beyond the Bucket List. I mean, the bucket list is almost, there's a silliness to it. You know what I mean? Like bungee jumping out or whatever. But I think there's a whole other step of how can we expand ourselves and use this precious gift of life in a meaningful way. And I think that's what you're getting at, to live life intentionally even before revitlement or while you're in an earlier revitlement.
Yeah, because sometimes I think I don't know how long my life is going to last. So I would like to live as fully as possible right now.
Yes,
and right here.
Exactly. I think that's terrific.
So if our audience would like to know more about you, and where can they go? How can they find you?
Okay. I've made it easy. They just need to go to joantabb.com, JOANTABB.com. And that brings them to the Grade in 8 coaching website, which is harder to spell out. But my name is nice and easy, 8 letters, Joan, JOANTABB.com, and everything should be there for them. If they're specifically interested, I told you I'm proud of about 100 articles in my career blog on everything about careers, and it's called Dear Coach Joan, Career Advice. So they also can Google Dear Coach Joan. And then for my books, they're on Amazon, and they're welcome to look at them on Amazon. And there's a lot of, I'm happy there's a lot of 5-star reviews where people talk about how they've really used the books and how they've helped their lives. So I'm happy to share that too.
So for everybody who's watching or listening, you'll find all important information about Joan right below this interview. So we make sure you find her. And I don't want to close this conversation with you without asking you if there's anything important that we oversaw.
I guess I want people to know that the next step in revitlement is bringing people together to do it together. I thought the book was going to be more of a solo opportunity, but in going around to give book talks at bookshops, people asked me if I would do workshops so they could leverage off each other's ideas and share. So I've started to do workshops, and they're a lot of fun, and people are getting ideas they said they never would have gotten just by, you can use the book by yourself, but by participating with others, it's fun, and it ends up bringing out different aspects that you may not have thought about. So if you're interested in workshops, let me know. They really, revitlement workshops, that's the next big thing.
Oh, this is such a good idea. And maybe one day you'll even have an online course so that everybody from everywhere in the world can learn from you.
Yeah, you never know. I tend to be a person who loves in-person exchanges, but technology does empower us to get together from all points. So there is a real value of that too. Just like our conversation now happening overseas, we're not letting the distance get in the way. Here we are, intimate and up close. It's beautiful.
That's totally true. The only thing that is missing is the opportunity to hug each other.
Yes, that's right. And toast with our wine glass or our coffee cup.
Exactly. Joan, thank you from my heart for sharing this time and space with
me. And
me.
Nina, thank you from your heart for asking great questions, reading the book, and really getting into a deep conversation. I so appreciated this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So with this, goodbye everybody, and always remember to take the driver's seat of this car called your life and to create this lifetime to your taste. It's our pleasure here at Mind Gourmet to support you with our food for thought. Bye everybody, and bye Joan.
Bye, thank you. Have a great day.
You too.